Joining us now is Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Center for Security Policy, Deputy Managing Editor, Jerusalem Post, our friend Caroline Glick. Hey, Caroline.
Hi, Steve. Great to be on your show again.
Well, thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. Okay, so what is the status of these talks? I mean, after they were announced, then I heard from the Palestinian side that the precondition was 67 borders as a starting point, and from the Israeli side, no precondition. So, was Kerry going around telling two sides two different things to try to get this to happen?
You know, it's possible, but I think that mainly, the United States has been sending each side notes, in study hall saying to the Palestinians, well, we agree with you that the talks should be based upon the 1949 armistice lines, and they've been telling the Israelis, we agree with you that Israel is a Jewish state and that the Palestinians have to recognize it. So the United States has sort of tried to play both ends, and in the end, what happened was that Kerry, like you said, announced the negotiations had been agreed upon and that they were going to start it, and the Palestinians said, no, we agreed that we talk about negotiating. We're not actually going to be negotiating. So right now there are supposed to be Israeli and Palestinian representatives arriving in Washington, D.C. next week, but it's not clear that the Palestinians are going to show up, and it's not clear whether, if they do in fact show up, they're going to have any meetings with the Israelis, or if they do have meetings with the Israelis, that these are going to be talks about anything other than the size of the table.
Why now, do you think, no matter what the talks are, if they actually do sit down, or even if they don't, why this push now after, 3-4 years of nothing?
5. I actually think that more important than after 4 or 5 years of nothing is why now, when Israel is the only country in the entire region that's at peace, is the U.S. Secretary of State putting all of his energies into getting peace negotiations started when the legacy of these negotiations has been destabilization and terrorist war. In Syria, the country is embroiled in a horrible civil war that's turning into a Sunni Shiite war that's sucking in Lebanon and Iraq and is having reverberations throughout the Persian Gulf and the Middle East in general. In Egypt, we've just seen the second revolution in so many years, and the Egyptians themselves are moving into a state of civil war. So, why on earth the Americans at this time are putting massive pressure on Israel to make huge concessions to Palestinians who themselves are carrying out a diplomatic and terrorist war against Israel and trying to destabilize the situation still more, is really the big mystery and the most disconcerting aspect of this entire situation.
Yeah, I would say. I read where Bibi has said that, look, in the unlikely eventuality that there is some kind of deal reached, which I don't ever see happening, and I think that compared to the alternative, that's a good thing for Israel. But he said he would put any peace initiative to a referendum. Is that what he was talking about? A possible deal, or just the concept of proposals? What would he put to a referendum, and how do you think the public would vote?
I think he was talking about a deal, and today, the public is being polled 65% oppose negotiations to 28% that support them, and that's just negotiations. The truth of the matter is that, like you said, there's no chance of a deal being reached because the Palestinians themselves are so radicalized. They have been indoctrinated now for 20 years since the PLO set up its regime in Judea and Samaria and Gaza to look at Jews the way that the Nazis did, just as non-humans, as subhumans who should be annihilated. And for them, the idea of even negotiating with Jews is completely unacceptable. And any Palestinian leader that would reach an agreement with the Israelis would be killed. So there's no chance whatsoever, and that's even disregarding the rise of incredibly radical forces throughout the surrounding Arab countries. So, there's absolutely no chance of a deal ever being reached. And the deal that the United States is pushing for is a deal that, if it was ever concluded, would make Israel into a totally indefensible country and a strategic basket case in a region that is no longer friendly to the United States except in Israel.
Absolutely. We're talking to Caroline Glick. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking to Caroline Glick, Senior Fellow, Middle Eastern Affairs for the Center for Security Policy and Deputy Managing Editor of the Jerusalem Post. Also was a one-time advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu. Here on the Steve Malzberg Show, let me just ask you about a couple of other countries in the region, and maybe surprisingly to you, start out with Turkey. You know, this whole phone call that Netanyahu made to the Prime Minister of Turkey, basically apologizing and agreeing to reparations for the incident that took place a few years back, where Israel boarded a ship that was headed to Gaza, and terrorists were killed. John Kerry even equating that to Americans' loss of life at the Boston Marathon, which was nauseating. But that's gone nowhere, really. And there's a piece in the Jerusalem Post today that most people thought it was the amount of compensation that was at question. But apparently the Prime Minister wants Netanyahu to do even more mea culpa, to admit, that it was absolutely wrong what they did, et cetera, et cetera. Typical Israeli, I want to say Arab or counterpart fashion. Israel gives, and then the other side says, well, that's not enough.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, the Mavi Marmara was a terrorist ship, and the people on board were from a Turkish organization, the IHH, that is affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and it was sponsored by the Turkish government. So this was an incident of Turkish state-sponsored terrorism against Israel. It was unlawful under international law because their stated goal was to provide aid and comfort to an illegal terrorist organization, Hamas, which illegally seized control of Gaza in 2007. And Israel's maritime blockade of the Gaza coastline is completely in conformance with international law. So Israel was behaving in a manner that was in total conformance with international law, and Turkey behaved in a manner that was a complete breach of international law. And the one major accomplishment that President Obama achieved during his visit to Israel was that he coerced Prime Minister Netanyahu into calling Turkish Prime Minister Recep Erdogan in a three-way conversation with Obama on the line, and forced Netanyahu to apologize for what Israel did to the Turks. And so what the Turks are now saying is that it's not enough that Israel apologized. Israel also has to accept criminal culpability for what its armed forces did. And this is obscene, and it's very dangerous. What Obama did set a very dangerous precedent for forcing Israel to apologize for lawful operations by its military taken in defense of Israel and against illegal armed forces aboard a terrorist-supporting ship. So the whole thing is far more serious than just why is Israel being forced to concede again when it didn't do anything wrong, because this was an American action that Obama personally forced Israel to make this apology, and now we're seeing the consequences of it, the bitter consequences and the dangerous consequences of it. Remember that Turkey is a member of NATO.
Right. Do you sometimes wonder, as I do, just what Obama has on certain people? I'm not only saying foreign leaders, but and in reference here to Netanyahu, but I mean even Republicans in the Congress, what he might have. If we know about NSA, we know about all that kind of stuff. I mean, I wonder if real life politics is, you do this or somehow it's going to leak out, blah, 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 blah. Does that ever enter your mind?
What really enters my mind is deep worry and concern over what the U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, has shaped up to be over the past 5 years. And the United States, in opposition to its own national security interests, its morals, its values, has been abandoning its allies one by one and embracing the cause of their enemies, while saying that they are doing it in support of peace and stability, two goals that these kinds of actions are just distancing from reach.
Okay, one more. Egypt. How do you view what's going on there and what might happen there?
Egypt is very disconcerting because right now they're on a very sort of mundane level, it looks promising because the military overthrew a Muslim Brotherhood government. And the Muslim Brotherhood is a jihadist movement that calls for the annihilation of the Jews, the destruction of Western civilization, the destruction of the United States, and the formation of a global caliphate. It spawned Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and a host of other jihadist organizations throughout the Sunni Islamic world. So it's a very dangerous group, and it was just overthrown by the military, which does not share its globalist aspirations, although it's also quite anti-Western and anti-democratic and certainly anti-Semitic. And so neither of the factions are particularly positive actors. The thing that's very disturbing is that Egypt is so unstable. It has no money to buy food, and it's the largest wheat importer in the world. It doesn't have enough wheat to feed its own people. And you're going to see mass starvation, which in and of itself is destabilizing. And right now we see that country spinning into a civil war, which is extremely dangerous. And I'm not exactly sure how it would be possible to even avert it at this point, because the military sided with half of the population of Egypt against the other half of the population of Egypt. And, insofar as Israel is concerned, we see the escalating violence in the Sinai Peninsula across the border from Israel. And, it's only a matter of time, we assume, before those attacks inside of the Sinai begin targeting Israeli targets again, and perhaps on a massive level, and that, in turn, if the Egyptian military isn't able to contain the violence, could force Israel to retaliate, and that retaliation could spur a conventional war between Egypt and Israel. So it's very, very dangerous.
All right, Caroline, I appreciate your time as always, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Caroline Glick, ladies and gentlemen, Senior Fellow Middle Eastern Affairs for Center for Security Policy and Deputy Managing Editor of the Jerusalem Post.